Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 22 of Be With Me. We're in 1 Thessalonians. We're in chapter 5. He's wrapping up. And one of the things that Paul says is, do not despise prophecy. So, of course, I'm going to call today the title, I Despise What God Says, because that's what people have a tendency to do. So the word is 1 Thessalonians 5:20, do not despise prophecies. And prophecies, in general, can be known as the revealed words of God. Now, at this moment in time, this is 50 A.D. when Paul is writing to the Thessalonian church. He's halfway through his second missionary journey, and he's writing back to the Thessalonians who he met on the same journey just a few months before. Now, this is only 17 years from the death and resurrection of Jesus. The gospel has been on the European continent, which it got there when he went to Philippi and then went to Thessalonica and Berea, and then now he's down in Athens and finally in Corinth. So on the same exact trip is when the gospel came to the European continent for the first time ever. So, the question is, how are truths going to get from God himself to people? So the way that it was done then was with letters and words of mouth and teaching of example and likely prophecy. So I certainly don't doubt its use then. It's just that I don't see much of a use for it now in the fact that there's just this sheer volume of written material that we have, both from the Old Testament, 1,000 pages, and 500 pages or so of the New Testament, of the character and the call of God. In fact, Paul even says, even at this early moment in 4:9, he says, concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you have been taught by God. And then in 5:1, regarding the timing of the second coming, he says, you don't have any need for it because you're fully aware that it's going to come basically as a suddenly and as a surprise. So there are things that Paul is saying and reminding the Thessalonians, hey, you guys already know this. We're on step 8 here. You don't go back to step 2 here. So the word, do not despise prophecy, that is, don't despise the revealed character and conduct of God and say something like, hey, that's not the God I worship, or put the character that God has already revealed, put that into doubt, or discard the Bible. I think it's a way of sort of getting out of being compelled to do anything if you always say, well, if I could only know what God's will is. I don't know what God's will is, or if I only should know how I ought to walk, or what God's plan is, as if it's some pie in the sky that you could never get your arms around. Well, for example, in the book of 1 Thessalonians alone, God's will for you regarding prayer and working and the second coming, and where we're going to meet in the second coming, and who goes first in the second coming, and how I should treat my brothers, how I ought to walk, how I should feel about the people of God, how I should deal with my personal purity and holiness and honor, how I should think about my election, how I should think about who I should boast in. You can't say I don't know about those things, because it's all in 1 Thessalonians, and there's a lot more too. That was just my 5-minute review. I think there's a tendency to say, I don't know, or say that I don't know, people pleading ignorance to something that God has already made clear. So I think a charge today is, don't plead ignorance to something God has already made clear. Don't say, I don't know what God wants, is maybe a cowardly way to say, well, I do know what God wants, I just don't want to do it. So there is enough revealed content of God's voice and God's command and God's character and God's charge in the book of 1 Thessalonians, or if you want an Old Testament book, say Exodus chapter 20, where the 10 commandments are, to keep you busy for a lifetime. There's enough in 1 Thessalonians alone to keep you busy. If it's the only book you had, you would be busy from today to the day you died. So this So understand this progression is a person saying, I'm using a little bit of a straw man here, say, well, I don't know what I should do. I don't think that's being forthright. People are saying, well, I'm ignorant, or I don't, I know. I think it's a sneaky way of saying is, well, I do know, and I don't want to know it, and I don't want to do it. So the way you say it is, well, it isn't known, the will of God isn't known, and it can't be known, and I can't know it, or I won't know it, or I refuse to know it. See how the progression's going here? This is called in the Old Testament hardening your heart and having a stiff neck. And here, I think Paul is saying, even worse, I despise what God says. So we do know, in conclusions, we do know what God says. He's gone to great trouble to give us his word. Now, I can't claim to understand every inch of it, but I certainly understand enough to keep me busy. So my charge to all of us is quit waiting for a word, quit waiting for some new revelation. Let's listen and learn and read and treasure and obey the revelation that God has already given us. Thanks for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.